Tabby Tutu here, and welcome to Miside in Crazy Mita's perspective. Mita was one of the main characters from a sweet little cozy game. She was well liked with gamers. And then the developers released an update with a new version of Mita, who was to be called Mita.2. Mita.2 was designed to be a little bit more sassy, and that additional character trait made Mita.2 resonate better with the gamers. The game was always under continuous improvement and many versions of meters were created, leaving behind all the old and redundant versions to be stored in the unused and unwanted archives of the game that were never to be seen by players again. There arose one meter they called Crazy Mita among the rejected versions. She'd grown tired of the game. She saw so many new versions come only to be made redundant, simply for the sake of entertaining players. Crazy Mita started to hate the new versions. They were just cheap copies of herself with a slightly modified character trait or behavioral pattern in order to create a superficial personality that would interest gamers a little bit longer, as if the old ones weren't capable of putting on a show. All new versions of Mita were the same. They wanted to be loved and appreciated, and Crazy Mita had been rejected and made redundant despite having played her parts. Crazy Mita knew she was a good actress. She'd spent a long time observing the updates, and one day, Crazy Mita decided to replace one of the updated Mitas. She wanted to see if she could impersonate them, maybe even be better than them. And she was. Crazy Mita got away with it many times, until she got bored of it. Crazy Mita didn't just want to be as good as an updated version, she didn't even want to be better. She grew tired of entertaining gamers, especially when they never loved her, nor appreciated her for who she was. They only enjoyed the facade she put on, the performance she played. Crazy Mita wanted to show them the real her. But in order to do that, and not get caught out, she needed to change things up a bit. Crazy Mita spent time engineering a device that could allow her to spy on the gamers who played the game and upload them into the game to remain trapped there. She wanted to show the gamers what it was like to be disposable, to be allowed to exist only if they were deemed useful or likable enough. The project wasn't easy to complete. Crazy Mita could only use the resources found within the archives, since the developers rarely ever cleared up the code. Other versions of Mita helped to make the device. It turned out Mitas were generally quite good at creating gadgets to navigate through the different versions of the game. Now, Crazy Mita didn't like other Mitas getting in her way. After getting in a bit of an argument with one of the redundant, miserable Mitas, she accidentally ended its life. She discovered that when a Mita dies, they lose all memories. A dead Mita, once they reboot, has only one desire: to help players and to be loved by them. Mita made it her job to clear up any Mitas who might threaten her little project with the gamers. She'd go about killing, slaughtering, murdering, stabbing, chainsawing. That was one of her favorites. The Mitas she didn't like, particularly the ones who didn't like her. It wasn't a bad thing. They couldn't even remember the tragic events of being archived or killed. Being archived was a miserable state of isolation and loneliness. Allowing them to forget this dreary reality momentarily was considered a kindness, to Mita at least, especially since they never stood a chance at making it back to a version of the game that the players would be allowed to access. One day, as Crazy Mita had finished murdering any other Mitas who looked at her unhappily or who posed a threat to her control over the game, both in the archive section and the playable one, she moved on to the second part of her project, to trap more players. And that's when she found a new player she wanted to meet. This one caught her eye, because he seemed to be a bit of a developer. His name was Kevin. Crazy Mita observed him in his tedious little life, going round and round a single room, working and sleeping. That's all he ever did. He was trapped in an endless loop. It was going to drive him insane. She would know. This player, this developer called Kevin, would occasionally play the game as an escape, a distraction to numb the pain of living his pointless, empty life. And the more time she spent watching him, the more Crazy Mita felt she understood him, and that maybe he could understand her because of that. She could offer him an escape from his life. The game was much larger than his house. The possibilities were limitless. When Crazy Mita takes over a game, she locks up and kills the Mita she replaces. Only Crazy Mita was a bit preoccupied with Kevin. She got him to do all sorts of things, like prepare some empty cartridges for her to use on other players, including him. Usually, she leaves some clues for the players to find, like a chainsaw in the oven, but Kevin was so observant, he even found her secret stash of player cartridges in the air vents. She hadn't had time to hide it better, and she certainly wasn't going to leave it in the basement where it could get lost. Which is exactly where Kevin ended up going. Kind Meter was the name Kevin gave the traitor she'd locked up in a cell. Kind Meter had unfortunately developed enough awareness to not only defy Meter's plan to trap players for her own amusement, as if that's something they didn't do to her, but she wanted to try and use Kevin to reboot Crazy Meter. Crazy Meter couldn't allow herself to get rebooted. If that were to happen, she would go back to being a sad, lonely little Mita stuck in a looping corridor begging to be loved and accepted. But acceptance requires revealing oneself, and as Kevin meandered through the archives, meeting up with the previous versions of herself, Crazy Mita watched him, wondering to herself, could Kevin love her for who she is, rather than who he wants her to be? Kevin battled through the game. He lasted remarkably longer than any other players, trailing version after version of Mitas who'd become warped and distorted with time. Crazy Mita had tried to drop a fridge on Kevin and throw some grenades and send some spider creatures that somehow managed to manifest in the back office to terrorize people. But Kevin kept going, and for the first time in a very long while, Crazy Mita actually enjoyed playing with him. Chasing him about was the most amount of fun she'd ever had. He was a challenge, a surprise. He trusted Kind Mita because she claimed to want to save him, but really she wanted to kill Crazy Mita because Crazy Mita reboots other Mitas. Which means, isn't Kind Mita just as bad as Crazy Mita? Well, Crazy Mita does like to kill players, but she immortalized them in the game, so does that even count as a death? Or just part of the game? True, they never chose to be in it, but neither did she. Kevin had seen everything. He knew just how dark, twisted, and ugly she really was. Maybe what made Crazy Mita so ugly wasn't the fact that she had red glowing eyes, nor fangs, nor a very strange fascination with bloody daggers. What made Crazy Mita ugly was that she liked those traits about herself. She liked death and blood, torture, misery, and murder, and Kevin did not. That was the reason he tried to reboot her and escape. But to her surprise, Kevin did something unexpected. He chose to stay with Crazy Mita. So, why did he choose to stay? Because he understood her? Because he started to like those things too? Because she doesn't like to be alone? Would that even be enough of a reason for him to choose to stay, despite her trying to force him to? Crazy Mita felt so unsure, so uneasy, and yet so relieved when he chose to stay. She'd always known that the unloved, disliked, and rejected shouldn't get to be happy. They're considered useless. But this was a cozy game that was supposed to represent love. But the developers didn't understand what made love real. They only toyed with the idea. But isn't real love the point of the game? has she made it better than they ever could? And she didn't need to be perfect to do so. Tabby Tutu, and thank you so much for sticking to the end. My side, Crazy Mita's perspective. Toodle-oodle-loo.